Blowout is Brian De Palma's 1981 film with the tagline, "Murder has a sound all its own." It's a story of a film sound effects technician played by John Travolta, a character, Jack Terry, who happens to be outside recording wind noises one night, just like my son and I were imitating in the opening of this video, when he hears the sound, which you also heard just now, of a crash. And he spends the movie trying to determine whether this was foul play, by whom, and how he can bring down the perpetrators if it is. The crash itself is based on two historical events kind of mashed together into some kind of commentary about American politics. Chappaquiddick, of course, which is a direct reference you'll sort of see in the movie, and the Watergate scandal. And the film references three other movies quite explicitly. The first of these is Blow Up. So in the title Blowout, we obviously see a reference to that. Blow Up is Antonioni's film, a story about a photographer in England who photographs inadvertently what he believes to be a crime and tries to make the image bigger and bigger and bigger to get to the bottom of things. That movie was the influence of an American film called The Conversation, which is also about a sound engineer, this time played by Gene Hackman, who records some sounds and then misinterprets them and spends the movie trying to figure out who's responsible for a crime that he himself too believes has occurred. And then there's Vertigo. Vertigo is referenced not quite as explicitly in the movie, but in the themes of obsession on the part of Jack's interest in the crime and sacrifice on the part of Sally, played by Nancy Allen in the film. The film also stars John Lithgow and Dennis Franz, who you'll recognize instantly, I think, as you watch it. Brian De Palma, he attended Friends Central, and he was coming off of a series of films that included Dress to Kill, Carrie, Sisters, all pretty big pictures that did really innovative stuff with style. He was known, he still is known, as somebody who uses a kind of glossy, flamboyant style. And he does this in such a way to reference movie making from the past and make you think about what movies can do. So, for example, in Sisters, his horror movie about twins, sort of, there's moments in that movie where there's a split screen and you see an action or a crime from two perspectives simultaneously. Something that's often not done because we're supposed to be sutured and brought into the narrative and not made aware of the artifice very often. But artifice and authenticity are two big themes of Blowout, the movie that we're going to be talking about this Monday. There's the idea of authenticity in what it is that we're trying to capture in the sound that you see through the film. The idea of authenticity and that our political leaders ought to be people that we can trust, who tell the truth. And notions of artifice, presented particularly in the Liberty Day parade that we'll see here, in the fireworks, in a celebration of America that seems to have very little to do with the crime that's at the heart of the movie. Philadelphia is also all over this movie. So I think De Palma being from Philadelphia really shows through the film as it plays out. Every scene of Philadelphia is filmed in its gritty glory. Even the signs look fantastic. So spot the location is not a difficult game to play with this movie, but it is wonderful to see how everything has changed since 1981 in the places that De Palma shoots here. The film is a movie about sound. And yet, at the same time, it's a very strange movie about sound because, as sound scholar Jay Beck has noted, the sound in this movie is somewhat of a MacGuffin in that it only seems to motivate the narrative, but it's actually not used super creatively in the movie itself. So if you think about the opening moment of the crash that I was pretending to do at the beginning of this video, I was there this morning pretending like I was filming wind, like John Travolta. It is not possible to film wind that way, but also it's not possible to film wind in that location. That water there is extremely noisy, as is everything else that comes through. So it's not interested in a realistic representation of sound or even something of a psychological interpretation of sound the way a conversation is. But sound is used to give us a sense of what's possible, a sense of mystery. And this is because this is one of the films that a sound theorist named Michel Chion says is organized around the screaming point. So he identifies a series of films that are organized with a woman's scream somewhere at the center. And this is one of those movies. In the center of the movie, he says there's a woman's scream, and around that scream, a black hole emerges. All the lines of the narrative fall apart here. And I don't want to reveal what happens in this movie, but you can see how traditional genre rules about political thrillers, action cinema, or mysteries don't actually work all that well as those lines come to converge. Other films that Shion puts into that list are King Kong and Hitchcock's The Man Who Knew Too Much. So I don't think it's an accident that De Palma uses that structure, because he's often known as an imitator of Hitchcock, and we can see that throughout this movie and many of his other films. The film has 3 really interesting moments that I think it's worth looking out for. The first of them is the opening of the movie. There's a long Steadicam shot, and you'll think you're watching a different movie because you sort of are. This is the fake movie within the movie called Co-Ed Frenzy that John Travolta's working on as a sound engineer. And De Palma got the inventor of the Steadicam, Garrett Brown, to shoot that sequence. Garrett Brown had just been coming off The Shining, and he was really hoping he would get a chance to make a better version of the Halloween opening sequence, that point of view shot from the little boy's perspective where we see the knife come into the frame and all of that. He thought that was done very cheaply, and that with the Steadicam, the feeling of motion that you get there but without the jitteriness of it, that looks much more like human perception, that he would be able to shoot something really spectacular. But what De Palma wanted was a parody of horror movies, not a great looking horror film. So the Steadicam shot that we see opening this movie is funny and choreographed and also quite offensive in many ways. And it's not what Garrett Brown had hoped for, but he was still so thrilled to work with De Palma on the film, and the shot works really well in what it's supposed to do in the movie. The second thing to look for are what is called a split diopter shot. There's 15 of these in Blowout, moments where the lens is split into a foreground and a background, and both of them are very clearly in focus, and both of them are drawing our attention to the frame. 4 of these shots occur in the park where my son Hugo and I shot the opening to this. So you'll find them really pretty easily. They're shots that would be impossible to film with any traditional kind of camera. And those 2 cause us to think about the artifice of movie making. And then the third moment to look for, I think, is a moment that rhymes really well with the Co-Ed Frenzy Steadicam opening. And that's the chase scene down Market Street, where John Travolta is driving and ends up crashing into the window of the Wanamaker building. He drives right through a Liberty Day parade. This moment, I think, is a very not so subtle commentary on American patriotism, the artifice around it, and how to get to the truth. One must smash right through it. So we'll see that moment in the film as well. There's many other moments, of course, to look for and talk about in this movie. It's a movie about making movies, certainly. All these references to other films. And then John Travolta's character in the film makes his own film, essentially a flip book type thing. It's a movie about making movies. It's an incredibly interesting film. And it has really interesting music, actually, by a guy named Pino Donaggio, who is an Italian composer. The Sally and Jack theme has this melancholy air that reminds me a lot of the music to Cinema Paradiso by Morricone, who just died really recently. So you can listen for that theme and think about what you think about that. So I hope that you'll join Andrew and I to talk about it this Monday. We'll see you there. Thanks.